Hello, ladies and gents. Welcome to this recorded lecture. We're going to be talking about the compare and contrast essay for Agatha Christie's Murder on the Orient Express. I've got the headphones on, so you don't also have to listen to the Mickey Mouse Clubhouse show that my kids are watching so that I can talk to you about this. Uh, so I want to kind of show you the outline on one side of our screen here, and then I want to show you how we might take those ideas from the outline and incorporate them into body paragraphs. Because as we're going to this first essay together, sometimes taking ideas from a bullet pointed list and weaving them together in a way that's clear and concise, but also cohesive, can be a little bit of a trick. So I want to make sure that we're all on the same page here, that we get an idea of how this might look. Um, and hopefully it inspires us as we are writing our own essays this week, because we've got that peer review coming up in a few days. And we want to make sure that we have a complete draft of an essay. Doesn't have to be perfect, but we want it to be written so that we can get feedback on it, so that we can continue to revise and make it better. So let's just jump right in. The first thing I want you to note is that this essay is done in MLA format. We talked about MLA format last week, I think, and there is a module folder in Canvas that shows you all the MLA format stuff. But just to show you what this looks like, make sure that your essay looks like this, and you can get good points in that category of the rubric. We've got our last name and page number. This is going to appear on every page of the document. And then we have this information. This will only appear on the first page of the document. Your name, my name, the class, and then the date. You'll note that the date is written day first, and then month, and then year. We talked about how that was from our wonderful friends in Europe. That's how they write their dates, and MLA format borrowed that from them. So that's why we write them like this. Then we have our title. The title is capitalized and centered, but that is all the special stuff it gets. It doesn't get italicized or bolded or underlined. It's not a bigger font. This is just how it looks, capitalized and centered. And then we begin the body of our essay. We indent the first line of every paragraph. All our font is 12 points Times New Roman style, and it is double spaced. We've got 1-inch margins on the page, and we should be good to go there. So let's just jump right in. As we look at our outline, we'll see that there's a hook. This is something that hopefully grabs our reader's attention. Then we've got context for our argument, and then we've got our thesis statement. So if we want to go ahead and like color code this, because it makes it nice and easy if we do, our hook is going to be red, our context will be blue, and our thesis will be green, because that's fun. So our hook is this first sentence right here. When benevolent people find themselves in a constant struggle with what they believe and the pain of tragedy, the pain that tragedy causes in their lives, they're forced to examine what lengths they're willing to go to get peace. You're like, oh, that's thought-provoking. So that could be a hook. Hooks are just something that engage your reader's attention. So it could be a surprising plot twist. It could be a meaningful anecdote. It could be an interesting quote. It could be a thought-provoking sentence like this. So anything that you think is going to grab your reader's attention is the way we're going to go here. And then we go ahead and give some background information. And so that background information is the context. We get a little bit of context here where we talk about some of the themes in Agatha Christie's work. We talk about grief and how maybe it muddies the difference between right and wrong. And then we talk a little bit about Agatha Christie, her novel, and the purpose the novel plays. And then we deliver our thesis statement. And the thesis statement is always the last sentence of our introductory paragraph. And of course, we want that thesis statement to do a couple things like we discussed earlier this week and also last week, and also you worked on in your thesis worksheets. Want to make sure that it has context. So that's going to be the name of the book and the author. So Agatha Christie's novel, Murder on the Orient Express. Check. We've got context. Points out the complexity and intricacy of human nature. That acknowledges the complexity of the issue. Check. And the inborn inclination that people have to act unlawfully in order to get revenge. That tells us revenge is the theme we're going to be arguing in the essay, and that this is complicated because humans are complicated, and sometimes we're willing to do things that we would never think we'd be willing to do because of what's happened to us in the past. All right, and then in the next paragraph, this is our context and summary paragraph. We talked about how we wanted this paragraph to be pretty short and concise. Think about how big a movie is. It's like 2 hours, but the trailer is 3 minutes, right? That's a much smaller piece of a bigger whole. That's what our summary paragraph is going to do. It's a much smaller piece of a much larger book. We're going to give the salient plot points. Don't worry about having like who did it at the end because like we're your audience, we know who did it, you can just tell us, so you don't have to like hint at it or anything. You can be like everybody murdered Ratchet, so you can say that in the summary. So if we're color coding still here, our summary we have is nice and short, it's clear and concise, and it lets us know what happened in the book, hits the main points. And then we've got a little discussion of literary elements, and then we tie back to our thesis statement. And that is what's happening here. So in this one, this student decided to look at symbolism in the novel, particularly the symbolism of the number 12, because there are 12 people in a jury. Juries are connected with justice, and there are 12 people. Sorry about that. Mickey Mouse is apparently not as entertaining as I thought it was. So we're talking about the number 12 as a symbol of justice because there's 12 people in a jury. Of course, Agatha Christie thought it'd be fun to play with that number, and so she's got 12 people who are then carrying out justice or revenge on Ratchet in this scenario. So the student talks about that symbolism there, and then we've got a nice transition where we connect back to the thesis, and that transition is a really interesting piece right here. So we've got Poirot understood their thirst for justice, but their actions put him in a predicament because everything they did goes against what he stands for, which is justice. So we've acknowledged the complexity of the issue that's in the thesis statement, and this transition is going to let us know that we'll then define these terms later on in the essay, and actually in the following paragraph. And we're back. So in the following paragraph, this is the definitions paragraph. We're going to define justice and we're going to define revenge. And so we've got a nice topic sentence here. The topic sentence functions as a little baby thesis. So this is going to let the reader know what the paragraph will contain. To get a better grasp of the ideas that Christie points out in her novel, it is essential to define justice and revenge. The reader clearly knows this paragraph is going to define justice and revenge. Awesome topic sentence. The topic sentence should let us know what the paragraph's going to do. Like we talked about with the diagnostic essay, tell me what you're going to do without telling me what you're going to do, right? It's like those TikTok videos. Uh, so this topic sentence is going to tell me what we're doing in the paragraph without telling me what we're doing in the paragraph. Uh, so we know that we're going to be defining justice and revenge. I've got a definition for justice right here that a student created. And then if you scroll down, they talk about this definition a bit. And then later on, they go on to define revenge in the paragraph. Here is the revenge definition. And this student created their own definitions. They're not citing anybody because this came out of their head. You can, of course, use the Merriam-Webster dictionary or Seltzer's article or anything along those lines to help you define these terms if you want. And so they've delivered this definition and then they give an example of that definition from the book. And you'll see that we are weaving these quotes into the writing. We introduce the quote, we give the quote, and then we explain why the quote is significant. We've got that quote sandwich functioning here. And so we give a little bit of context the first time we use Agatha Christie's novel. For example, in the book, when Colonel Arbuthnot was interrogated by Poirot for the first time, he expressed his preference for law and order, which leans into justice, right? He says, well, you can't go around having blood feuds and stabbing each other, which is ironic because that's 100% what Colonel Arbuthnot was actually doing on the train. Say what you like, trial by jury is a sound system. So it seems like he's endorsing justice here. We know as the reader now that we finished the book, like this is ironic because they went out and stabbed somebody. Uh, but this quote does seem to support the idea of justice. Trial by jury is a sound system. So we've got that quote. We've got our in-text citation. We remember that's the author's last name and the page number. The punctuation always goes outside of those parentheses. And then we have our sentence that is explaining what this quote does. In this quote, Christie seems to be telling her readers that justice is the ideal. And then we go on to our definition of revenge. We give our example from the book about revenge. And then we say why that quote is important, and we move on to a transition. So even though the passengers on the train were seeking justice, their emotions and motivation behind Cassetti's murder make it clear that this is a case of revenge. We've tied back to the thesis statement. The audience remembers what we're arguing about, and now they know we are going to be looking at revenge specifically in the following paragraph. The following paragraph is going to be that compare paragraph. That we get to show the similarities between revenge and justice. So we can look through this paragraph here and you'll see that there are some things that overlap, just like we talked about during our class time when we wrote up all those lists on the board, when we made our Venn diagrams in the compare and contrast lecture. There are places of overlap, so we're going to address those places here. And then transition onto our next paragraph, which is the contrast paragraph. This is where we get to say, while there are similarities, the differences are actually pretty significant. And so we'll go ahead and do that and use support from your different sources. This particular student leaned heavily on Dr. Seltzer's Don't Confuse Justice with Revenge, and then supported the ideas also with Murder on the Orient Express when they're talking about the different ways that they killed Ratchet and all that good stuff. Good stuff about murder. Probably not totally good stuff. And then we move into our synthesis paragraph. And this is where you really get to shine because this is where the more personal argument comes in to the essay. So you are going to be making your case, but you're supporting your case with the book and your other sources. So our topic sentence here, once again, serves as the little mini thesis for the paragraph. 12 people who knew what they were doing decided to kill another human being, an awful, heartless human being, but also still a human. Like that's the point we're trying to make here in this topic sentence. And then they make their big point of the paragraph here, and they say the intense effort to avenge Daisy Armstrong was corrupting, basically, and it made them murderers as opposed to carrying out justice. And then the student goes on to elaborate on that point. They were not lawfully appointed members of a jury. They weren't lawfully appointed anything. Instead, they wanted to represent the idea of justice, but because emotion and passion was driving them, it puts it much more in a revenge category. And we see that being fairly explicitly said in this very excellent quote from the novel, Ratchet had escaped justice. There was no question of his guilt. And because the justice system failed, these 12 people decided they needed to do something about it. And I like that the student also pulled in Seltzer here, talking about this idea of personal justice and how revenge might motivate those kind of actions. And then the student makes a really nice arguable statement here at the end of this paragraph where we give like this real life connection. It says the novel brings attention to the idea that even the most innocent person can be affected by grief and suffering, and that suffering can cause them to commit terrible crimes, crimes that they would never have considered doing under any other circumstances, probably that they didn't even think themselves capable of doing until they were put in this exact scenario. So it makes that human connection. It takes it beyond just the book and makes it something much larger and therefore something much more meaningful. And then we go ahead and write our conclusion. The conclusion starts with the restated thesis statement. This is where we take the ideas from the thesis and revise them and rework them and put them back down here. Then we hit the reader with some of our strongest argument points. This student used some great examples from the novel itself, saying Colonel Arbuthnot was very keen on 12. He thought that that made a sense of order, tried to justify the murder. Society had condemned him and they were only carrying out the sentence. Great quotes there to support the idea that the characters thought they were acting out of justice, but us as the reader can see that it was in fact revenge. And then we wrap it up with kind of a call to action and something that leaves the reader thinking at the end of the novel. So Murder on the Orient Express shows every passenger the whole plot, consistently lying and covering up for one another. Their motivation was out of pain and anger. When a loved one is killed or taken away, the solution for the ordeal seems to be a quest for revenge. And I think the emphasis on that seems to be because their closing statement, the thing they want their reader to consider is